What's up, everyone? George Balekji here with Foxborough Rush. But hey, make sure to check out the latest episode of Boston Has Entered the Chat. Casey Hudson and I go in depth about the Charlie McAvoy injury and preview USA versus Canada for the Four Nations Trophy going down at TD Garden in Boston. Plus, we talk in depth about Vlad Jr. and his possibility of landing in Boston. Alex Barth joins the show to give us the latest on what to do next that Tee Higgins is franchise tagged. And Ethan and Jason, as always, hold it down, recapping the latest in WWE Raw on Netflix. Now, let's get to Rush. What's up, everyone? What's happening? George Balekji here with Foxborough Rush. And I know normally it's me and Travis, but I'm going to give him a little break on this one. I think we all need a moment to reset because what we're going to open up with here is talking about the latest with Tee Higgins. The pie in the sky, the dream everyone had all offseason, including me, an elite wide receiver one in New England for Drake May, the franchise quarterback. But it's all that we have to come down to earth. We'll get into that. We'll have Sean McGuire of Nesson.com joining the show. He's going to give us 5 other players that the Patriots could target, but could also potentially be franchise tagged. And then Sean, Travis, and I take a look at the running back room for the Patriots and what the Pats' plan should be this season at the running back position. But first, let's start with it. It stinks. It ripped my heart out. It should rip it out for you guys too. Tee Higgins, franchise tagged by the Cincinnati Bengals. He will get $26 million, fully guaranteed money this year, or a team can sign him. And if the Bengals don't match that higher offer, then they have to give up draft pick compensation at a very high price. Not worth it, in my opinion, for a Tee Higgins. It could be 2 firsts for any wide receiver of that matter. But here's the thing, and I'm the one included, where we all have to move forward. Elite wide receivers don't hit the open market. Now, I said the Patriots should go after and trade for a Tee Higgins before last season. Get him in the building. You can pay him. Give him an extension middle of the season. You get ahead. Didn't happen. Here's a reality. Patriots aren't going to get Tee Higgins. Here's the other reality. This wide receiver free agency class isn't that great. So where do they go next? Well, let's look at it. There's Chris Godwin, 29 years old. Next season, he will be. Coming off a dislocated ankle, the same leg where he tore his ACL. He would be a good one if healthy. I just don't trust him coming off that injury. I think he ends up staying anyway, signing an extension with the Buccaneers. Amari Cooper, he'll be 31. He's regressed. Stephon Diggs, he'll be 32. Torn ACL. DeAndre Hopkins, he's 33 years old and only played 50% of the snaps for the Chiefs when he was in Kansas City. That, along with his age, that's a red flag for me. Hollywood Brown, he was productive when healthy for the Chiefs. He'll be 28. But how healthy will he be? And look back at just how he got to Kansas City. He was traded to Arizona for a first-round pick. And then Arizona let him walk into free agency. When any receivers hit free agency, you have to ask why. Because there's a reason a team is letting him walk for free. Darius Slayton, he was my guy as a wide receiver 2. In this current room, he'd be the wide receiver 1. He'd be a good building block, 28 chain mover, big body. He'd be good. You'd have to pay around 16, maybe 18 million a year. But I think worth it as a investment. Deontay Johnson, just 29. He goes against everything that Mike Vrabel's been preaching. What about the guys you can trade for? There's Tyreek Hill. He missed the playoffs with the Dolphins, said, I'm out. I don't want to be here anymore. And then he apologized and said, never mind, I want to stay. He's still an elite receiver. You'd have to trade with the Dolphins for him. But again, I don't think he'd fit in Vrabel's locker room. And I don't want any part of him as he's approaching 30 and he's actually getting slower on the field. Deebo Samuel, he's had over 420 touches the last 4 seasons. And it's not normal wide receiver touches. It's running back carries and catches as a guy that's great after the catch. He is much older than what he is because of the blows to his body he sustained. Cooper Kupp, you'd have to give up draft assets, and you'd have to pay him $29, $27 million a year as a cap hit. If he restructures and you could trade a 4th for him, I'd be up for it, but it would have to be perfect scenario. DK Metcalf, we'll get to that in just a second. Now, they're the guys that could get cut and become free agents. Devontae Adams, 1 year, prove-it deal. I know you're saying, Devontae Adams? But he didn't stink with the Jets. He had 850 receiving yards for the New York Jets, where that entire offense was a nightmare. 7 touchdowns, 12 yards per catch. Overall in the season, 85 receptions, 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. But how would he be in that locker room? You're establishing culture? How would he work with Josh McDaniels? I don't know. Tyler Lockett? With Jason emerging, he kind of cut Lockett's production in half. But that's an old wide receiver 2 at best. And I don't think it'd be worth it in the building blocks. Then there's the draft. And that's where it really is the real deal. Good wide receivers don't hit the open market. And you're going, but how do teams get such elite wide receiving rooms? Look at the Vikings. 2020, Justin Jefferson in the first round. 2022, they took Jalen Naylor in the sixth. He had 6 receiving touchdowns this past season, product of the system. 2023, Jordan Addison with a first-round pick. The Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown, a fourth-rounder. Jameson Williams, a first. The Rams, Cooper Kupp was a third-round pick in 2017. Tutu Atwell was a second-round pick in 2021. Puka Nacua was a fifth-round pick in 2023. And they just took Jordan Whittington as well. Those are guys that will have multiple contracts under the Rams. And look at Kupp, rookie deal. 3-year deal worth $15 million a year. That's when he had his amazing 2021 season. Then he got paid and didn't work out. The Bengals, Tee Higgins, second-round pick in 2020. Jamar Chase, top 5 pick in 2021. Andre Yosivach in 2023, sixth-round pick. And that was a guy that replaced Tyler Boyd. The Seahawks, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, JSN, all drafted. Again, we'll get to DK. Finally, the 49ers took Debo in 2019, traded a first for Brandon Ayuk in 2020, drafted Ricky Pearsall in the first round. While they still have Brandon Ayuk, they're drafting his successor in Ricky Pearsall. But then the Eagles, they just won the Super Bowl. Well, yes, they traded for A.J. Brown, but that was an extra first they got from the draft prior. They whiffed on Jalen Reagor, corrected themselves with Devontae Smith, traded for A.J. Brown. End of the day, the Eagles, 8 of their 11 offensive starters in the Super Bowl, they drafted. And look at the history of wide receivers that were traded for in the NFL. Stephon Diggs at 27 demanded a first. Same thing with Tyreek Hill at 28 demanded a first. So that's what ties it in. You could trade for DK Metcalf. He's 28 years old. He's not as elite as a Stephon Diggs or Tyreek Hill. That's fine. You give up a second for him and maybe a fourth and maybe a future third. You could accrue that by trading back from 4. Or better yet, you won't find a better player in the second round than DK Metcalf. He's a real deal. 4-year deal, 3 years matter, $80 million guaranteed total, $50 million at signing. He'll love Massachusetts of then. There's the draft. You can draft and trade, draft and sign. Let's get into that. Let's bring in Travis Thomas, my guy now. Trav, I just had to lay it out. My heart ripped out of my chest. It was broken. Every offseason conversation started with Tee Higgins, and here's the reality of it. It was never realistic because even the Bengals, who are cheap, they know they want to keep their quarterback happy. Where Joe Burrow says, if you do this, it reduces the cap hit, and I'm going to do that. And at the same time, again, elite pass catchers, elite left tackles, they don't hit the open market.
I wasn't heartbroken at all. I actually, in a weird way, anticipated this because the Bengals are stupid. Like, think about this, George. Okay, you want to keep Jamar Chase, Tee Higgins, Joe Burrow, Hendricks. You want to keep all these guys, right? Okay, well, you're not going to be able to realistically. And if Joe Burrow is going to restructure his deal, why didn't he do that from the onset, from the beginning? You knew Jamar Chase was due money. You knew Tee Higgins. All these guys were due to get paid. Why didn't you do that from the beginning? So this is panic. This is typical Bengals. Why? So that's one reason they're dumb. The other reason why I say they're dumb is because you could have traded Tee Higgins to the Patriots already or to whoever and got back assets and been looking at a war chest, a haul of draft picks coming into this draft. They didn't do that. So now they're in this position where it's like, okay, we'll franchise this guy. And then what? Lose him in a year? I mean, it's just, I'm telling you, this franchise cannot get out of their own way. I have lost so much money betting on the Bengals with Joe Burrow, and I just refuse to do it anymore. They can't build around him the right way. They're going to mess this up. So we should not be that surprised. Disappointed, okay, sure. But heartbroken, I don't feel that way, George, because it's just so typical Bengals. Not from a Patriot standpoint, from a Bengals standpoint. Like, okay, they're dumb. So take Tee Higgins off. Well, we always talk about big board, you and I. Take him off the big board. Fine. Let's start looking ahead at some of these options you laid out. I'm fine with having these young receivers that they have, adding a Cooper Kupp if the price isn't too much, a Chris Godwin if the price isn't too much. Bring one or both of them in. Fine. Let's not panic here. Let's see with Josh McDaniels. Let's see with Drake May in year 2. Let's see which one of these young guys can actually play. Let's see player development here. Let's see if our young wide receivers can get a little bit better now. I'm willing to see that, George, and not panic and then, kind of kick the can down the road a little bit on wide receiver till one hits the market, which doesn't really happen as you laid out, or you just keep throwing what against the wall until you get it right, whether it's drafting or whatever. But what I don't want to do now with Tee Higgins out of the picture, presumably, is panic and go and offer everything for DK Metcalf in Seattle or let's just relax here. Here's another thing you could do. You could attack this offense in a different way. Sure, wide receiver's weakness, even if you bring in Kupp or Godwin, right? Or both. It's still the weakness of your offense. You know what you could do while bolstering the offensive line? You could improve your run game. I mean, we're going to get into that later and put some names on it, but maybe it's your run game becomes more dynamic. Because Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson, I mean, what are they doing? They're average at best. They're not some dynamic backs. You can get dynamic in the run game, whether it's running the ball, maybe it's by committee, like we've seen Baltimore before Derrick Henry or the Chargers now. We've seen a lot of teams run the ball by committee with some success. The Chiefs have a lot of success with that. Maybe it's that. Maybe it is adding a dynamic back, which later in the show we'll put some names on. But I just think, George, the fact that Tee Higgins now presumably is out of this Patriot race, okay, fine. Recalibrate. We didn't know for sure whether or not he would be a true bona fide number one wide receiver anyway. We were all willing to give him that opportunity to prove that he is and pay him as so, George. But now you don't have to do that. So don't panic and go out and overpay draft assets and otherwise for a DK Metcalf or someone like that. Just continue, stay the course. Just stay the course. Improve the wide receiver room incrementally with veterans, a Cooper Kupp, a Godwin that fit into a much better budget in terms of the salary cap, and then reallocate the funds elsewhere. Obviously, priority one, fixing the offensive line. And then there's other things you can do, whether it's tight end, whether it's running backs, to add some wrinkles, to add some sizzle, to put a little juice into your offense. I just don't think we should panic and be all woe is me about Tee Higgins. To hell with him and the hell with the Bengals. Let's move on as the Patriots. That's how I see it.
If you're enjoying the conversation, hey, make sure to check out Boston has entered the chat wherever you get your podcast. Daily Sports Talk podcast here on Nesson. We cover sports, the culture in Boston, around the country, around the globe as well. It's available on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Twitch, YouTube as well. You can watch it on Facebook too. It's a reality check that people needed. Elite wide receivers do not hit the open market. Even look at Stephon Diggs. He was traded from the Vikings with a year left on his deal to the Bills, and that commanded a first-round pick. He was traded from the Bills to the Texans, again, with a year left on his deal, and that got them a second-round pick in return. But also the trade for and pay DK Metcalf, that is not a panic-type move. A panic-type move would be giving up draft assets for an old Cooper Kupp who hasn't played more than 12 games, had more than 815 receiving yards, or more than 6 touchdowns the last 3 seasons because of the cap hit that he carries. If he wants to still get paid, you stay as far away from as possible. You go out and sign a Chris Godwin. He dislocated his ankle. How long did it take Dak Prescott to recover from that type of injury? How long did it take Tony Pollard to recover from a significant broken leg injury? It takes a whole year to get back. It could be a prove-it deal. It would have to be the best bargain possible to get a Chris Godwin in the door. But if you trade a second-round pick and a fourth, or maybe a second and a future third for DK Metcalf, and then simply go, here's a 4-year deal, 3 years are real, $52 million guaranteed at signing, that's a 4th highest in the NFL. $80 million guaranteed overall, that's 5th highest. You're getting an elite wide receiver 1 pass catcher, a guy that's 6'4", 225, catches a great deep ball for your quarterback that has magnificent arm strength and is an absolute game changer. He commands offenses to game plan around him, and then that opens everything up for everyone else. And if you give up a second and a third, or a second and a fourth, or a second and a future pick, and let's say, Trav, you have that resolved and you don't like how where you're sitting at the fourth round pick shakes out, you go back from 4 to 6, you go back from 4 to 10, you could still get an elite pass rusher or maybe a good tackle. You get that second round pick back. And as the teams that have had success, look at the Bears. Drafted Rome Odunze, they paid for Keenan Allen, traded for DJ Moore. They have a good wide receiving room. Look at the Eagles. They traded for AJ Brown. And the way they were able to is because they had an extra first round pick because they traded back the draft before. The fact that they were able to trade for AJ Brown was because of the right move made the year prior. It's you either draft the right room, look at the Vikings, look at the Rams, look at the 49ers, you draft the right room, or you can draft and add. But the reality of it, look at the best wide receiver rooms. At one point or another, they've drafted an elite pass catcher. That's how they've gotten them in the door. Look at the Texans. Nico Collins, second round pick. Next year, they go with Tank Adell, also a day 2 pick. Like, the Texans built it up, and then they added the Stephon Diggs to put them over the top. The Eagles added A.J. Brown to put them over the top. And that's when you can trade for a DK Metcalf, and then let's say at 4, or you trade back to 7, and he's still there, a Tet McMillan, 2 big receivers, different type of skill sets. DK Metcalf has that breakaway speed, 2 big bodies. Tet McMillan, both great catch radiuses, both great in the red zone where the Patriots were terrible, both great on 3rd and 4th down. Or maybe later in the draft, Jaden Higgins, big athletic slot. Jack Besh, another big slot. Maybe a Jalen Noel or Xavier Restrepo they draft. So you trade for an extended DK Metcalf. You draft a Noel or Restrepo, who's that slot. And then you add them to a Kendrick Bourne healthy. Don't give up on Jalen Polk yet. There are guys that have struggled their rookie season. He had no confidence. The ability's there. You're going to get him in an actual coaching room around a Josh McDaniels. If he could grasp that system, Jacoby Myers 2.0. And you would take that when you have DK Metcalf, when you have a Jaden Higgins or Xavier Restrepo, a Pop Douglas, and then boom, you would have a Jalen Polk, who you shouldn't give up on after just one season.
Okay. If in this scenario, I would agree with you that if you could get a DK Metcalf for a 2nd and a 4, and all you had to do is give that up and then re-sign the guy, I would be all for this plan. My issue is I don't think the Seahawks see the world the same way as you. So if I can't get DK for what you laid out and it's going to cost me more, then I don't like it, George. And it's kind of my point of I think we may need to change the expectations for this offseason in terms of wide receiver 1. Again, if you could get DK Metcalf for the scenario you just laid out to me, if I'm hearing you correct, jump in here if I'm wrong, but I heard a 2nd and a 4, and then you give him an extension. Done. I'll do that today. I don't know if Seattle feels as though they can get a better deal. So they may say, yeah, we're not interested in that, thanks, and hang up the phone. And then some sucker team, and we all know who they are, it's the same teams every year, some sucker team comes in, sweetens a deal, and makes a deal for DK Metcalf, and they get a 1st-round pick or whatever it is. So it just depends. I think we need to, as Patriots Nation, accept what could be the reality of you're only going to add a veteran wide receiver. And the expectations, even for said veteran wide receiver, be it Cooper Kupp, be it Chris Godwin, the expectations is that not that you come in here and you're Justin Jefferson, but it's you come in here and you help guide and get the most and maximize the most from these young wide receivers, teach them how to be pros, grown-ups, etc. And then you yourself, Cooper Kupp, Godwin, whoever's, or both, you guys need to stay healthy and be productive wide receivers in this system. Wide receiver by committee. We're going to have to do it at least another year here. I can live with that if you're not panicked and you don't mortgage the future in terms of draft picks that are so valuable to this entire roster, George. This roster is Swiss cheese in a lot of ways. There's so many holes you need to fill. So if I can get a couple veteran guys in here that I'm not anticipating these crazy numbers in production from, but if they can come in, stay healthy, be productive, and guide and teach and mentor my young guys who are going to be here long after Cooper Kupp or Chris Godwin is gone, I'm okay with that. And then next offseason, do I have another shot? Is this a better next year? Is this a better wide receiver draft? So I guess my biggest fear is either trading still for Tee Higgins with the franchise tag on him. We know that cost. Or giving up too much, not in your scenario, but too much for a DK Metcalf. I just don't, I think at this point, there's other ways to enhance and upgrade the offense than panicking for a wide receiver one. That's all I'm saying.
It's one where the rebuild's going to be multi-years. This is a team that won 8 games the last 2 years. They've won 16 the last 3 years. 16 games, just over 5 games this season they're averaging. And that's where it sets that back of the patience play. Because on paper and the eye test, if the Patriots enter the draft or leave free agency, let's say, the initial rush of free agency, and Darius Slayton's only at, because we'll get into in just a moment with Sean McGuire, if the Giants franchise tag Darius Slayton. If he's only at, everyone's going to go, what? This guy that put up that numbers? There's going to be the memes. What we expected, DK Metcalf, he's 28. What we got, Darius Slayton, he's 28. It's the patience game. And what these teams have done, when you go back through the draft history of who they've taken, they're the some that have hit early, like a Justin Jefferson. There are the others that had to wait to get their true number one. It was Tee Higgins, then Jamar Chase. It wasn't Chase, then Tee Higgins that landed in Cincinnati. And of course, the Bengals, because of Joe Burrow tearing an ACL, that's why they had that top 5 pick. A lot had to go right for that to happen. Then there's the teams with the big gaps that played smart. The Buccaneers drafted Mike Evans, number 7 overall. He played on a rookie deal, 5-year extension, then a 2-year. Then they took Chris Godwin 3 years later in the 3rd round. Rookie deal, franchise tagged him twice, and then extended him. There are the ways they know how to navigate it. And then there's a simple, look what the Dolphins did. Drafted Jalen Waddle, traded for Tyreek Hill, gave up a first. When Tyreek Hill was arguably the best receiver in the NFL, arguably, that's what commands a first. That's where I can see the price of a DK Metcalf being a second. If it's a first, then a lot has to go right. And then this is a team with the flexibility. If at 4, you don't love how the board is, someone's calling you, you go back to 7, you get a 2nd round pick, you just get that. You get 2 seconds to trade back 3 spots in a weak draft, let's say, a second this year, a second next year. Take those, you could trade back into the first, get that. There's a lot of flexibility. DK Metcalf, at the basis of it, you get him, you pay him for 3 years. While Drake May is still under cost control, you're maximizing the window of a cheap quarterback contract. And I think that's what's big. Let's get into the conversation about franchise tags in just a second. Who will get tagged? We'll bring on Sean McGuire. But first, if you're enjoying the conversation, hey, make sure to check out Boston has entered the chat wherever you get your podcast. Daily Sports Talk podcast here on Nesson. We cover sports, the culture in Boston, around the country, around the globe as well. It's available on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Twitch, YouTube as well. You can watch it on Facebook too. All right, let's bring him in. Sean McGuire of Nesson.com. S-Mac, how are we feeling after the Tee Higgins news, man? Sad? Not surprised? This is part of it? You're just sitting back and going, hey, the Cowboys know how to draft wide receivers. That's one thing they can do right.
I think defeated is probably a fair word. I mean, the dream is dead, right? I mean, and when you first hear it, when you first hear the reports, it's not just the fact that the franchise tag he's going to get the franchise tag. It's the fact that he's agreeing to a long-term deal, and the Bengals anticipate coming to a long-term deal with him. So at this point, it seems like the franchise tag would just be like a very short-term thing. It's not, at least again, according to those reports, it's not that he's anticipated to play on the franchise tag in 2025. It's just, if they can't come to terms on a long-term deal before March 4th, then they have an extra few months. So I think that's the biggest takeaway, and it stinks. I mean, it's I wouldn't say it's like a stunner. I'm not surprised that the Bengals want to keep Tee Higgins. I'm not, especially after Joe Burrow came out and put, such public pressure on the organization to do it over the last whatever, months at this point. So not totally surprised, but I definitely do think it's fair for Patriots fans to kind of feel defeated about it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
told George
especially
I wasn't surprised that this happened. Not so much from the Patriots standpoint, being disappointed, Smizzle, but from the Bengals are stupid. And so I
Yeah.
ask you, I want to stay with Tee Higgins for a second here because he
Yep.
has to be ticked. I mean, he has to be ticked off. If we get into a situation where it's, he's pouting and he's unhappy and they can't come to terms like you talked about, the franchise tag really just buys them more time to negotiate with him for what he really wants. Let's say that goes south too, though. I mean, it still comes down to dollars and cents. Can you talk to me about a path where Tee Higgins is still in play for the Patriots? Or would this be a term I used with George earlier, Esmeezy, is kicking the can down the road? Is this something that would just reappear next offseason? Or is there still a way in which a disgruntled Tee Higgins can still force his way out of town?
Is there a chance? I would say, yeah, there's probably a chance, but I think the Bengals would really have to offend Tee Higgins with their offers. And, I think that's probably the only way that he comes free at this point. And, just based on hearing his comments, and God, it's one of those things, you take it for what it's worth, right? I mean, no player is going to come out and say, yes, I don't want to remain here or anything like that. Obviously, everyone says, yeah, I want to stay in Cincinnati. I want to stay in, insert city. But he did come out and say that. And, he said that he wants to remain with Joe Burrow and he wants to remain with Jamar Chase. And, that pact, I know Mike Gesicki was in it too. I don't know how he got included in that star trio, but Mike Gesicki was in there too. And essentially just after hearing a lot of Burrow's comments, it does make me think that Tee Higgins does want to remain in Cincinnati. And again, if he gets, if he's offended, if they, really lowball him on some offers, I think there's a chance, but I would say at this point it's a very small chance. And it's just the team has to know, like, they are better with Tee Higgins, and yes, they have another, top, probably the number 1, number 2 wide receiver in the league on the other side of him. But that doesn't take away from what Tee Higgins brings to the team as well. And I just think, with him there. They're a really good team, and they know that, and they know how they have to pay for it.
Yeah, it's either $26 million Tee Higgins plays for this year, getting $26 million fully guaranteed, or the Bengals for a guy that's going to be 26 this upcoming season. They give him the 4-year deal, get him still in his prime, keep their star quarterback happy. And he's also the one saying, hey, give me a pure up, like restructure my contract, make it all a signing bonus, pay me now. That alleviates a cap hit, because he sees what the Eagles are doing. Joe Burrow does. He sees what the Eagles are doing.
Why
he
didn't
sees
he
what the
do
Chiefs
it?
are doing. He's going to. You have to have takes two to dance.
From the beginning,
and the Bengals have to. Because he got his money. And you know what? The Bengals aren't the smartest front office. They're cheap because it's real money. When you give them a signing bonus, they give them all that money front loaded. They can't earn it through incentives, and that's real money out of the owner's pockets. That's not $500 million over the lifetime of a contract. That's $400 million out of their pocket right away, just throwing astronomical numbers out there. But that takes two to tango. That's why I was surprised the Bengals extended him. But when Joe Burrow's making comments of, give me a signing bonus, let me push my money towards the back end, offset the cost, let's pay guys now. Or when he's also saying that, you know what, I'll create the cap space. And then you have Tee Higgins getting a new agent. That's a lot of things pointing to, let's make it work with the Bengals and get them to stay there. All right, Sean, let's talk franchise tag guys. You put out an awesome article on net.com. Guys you are expecting could possibly be franchise tagged. Who do you got on that list? I'm sure Tee Higgins was the top of that, where this is something that shocked us, but at the same time you go, all right, the Bengals did smart football. They did smart business. Who else you got on your list, Sean?
Yeah, so essentially what the storyline was and what the premise of the story was just, the Patriots should keep their eye on these players. And two of those I'll just kind of start with are offensive tackles, Ronnie Stanley and Alaric Jackson of the Rams, Ronnie Stanley of the Ravens. I'll start with him. right now the franchise tag for that position is like 25 million, and I can't, player at 31 years old, especially with Baltimore's financial situation, they don't. That's pretty rich. That's too rich for them, given their financial situation. So Ronnie Stanley definitely, I would say, expected to hit the market. And again, he's a little older, but he's still legit. I mean, he would become the top tackle on the market. He'd become one of the top players on the market once he officially gets there. 6'6", 315 pounds. He allowed 2 sacks in 1,062 snaps at left tackle last year. 2 sacks in 1,062 snaps. So obviously just would greatly help the Patriots. And there's some things, I saw a few projections on him specifically, and I was seeing 2 years, 40 million, or 2 years, 43 million, something like that. So certainly a rich contract in the short term, but the Patriots have that money. And, one thing I would say is now with the Tee Higgins stuff, I mean, they should allocate those funds towards, players at different positions that fill big needs. And I just think, Ronnie Stanley now should kind of, once he hits the open market and doesn't get franchise tagged, I would think should become, one of their top targets. Sticking with the same position, Alaric Jackson, like I said, I would be surprised if he was franchise tagged again, given, that 21 or that 25 million franchise tag. And just undrafted guy. He's really developed over the last few years, coming off his best season in 2024, played almost 900 snaps at left tackle, just 3 sacks allowed. And he's massive, 6'7", 345 pounds, still just 26 years old. So, that age, obviously 5 years younger than Ronnie Stanley, doesn't have the same resume, obviously, but 5 years younger. So he would fit the Patriots timeline a little bit. And then there was an article published on ESPN today that kind of matched players to specific fits, and the Patriots were listed as the best fit for Jackson. So I think that goes to show he's not as highly graded as someone like Stanley. I think ESPN had him as the 40th free agent out of their 50. But again, would fit the Patriots long-term standing. And I just think he's another one that that the Patriots should keep an eye on. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a guy. I mean, he's played left tackle. No, he's played left tackle, and he's played at a high level, but he's so young. The Rams, now think about it. If they figure out how to get rid of the Cooper Kupp cap hit in some way, if someone just eats, let's say half of those cap hits, 13, 15 million each season the next 2 years, then you allocate that to an Alaric Jackson extension, they get ahead of the market, or they could end up tagging him to prevent him from leaving, and they get him to an extension. There isn't no lock that the franchise tag happens, but teams do that to protect themselves and kind of trap a player in a way. Ronnie Stanley makes sense just at his age, and the Ravens only have $5 million in cap space. They got to figure him out, or they just got to look towards the draft. A team that drafts really, really well, that's a team I could see betting on themselves. I don't love Stanley at his age. I don't love that he's had the first healthy season in the last 3 years, but it's about what do I hate the most? And I hate the Patriots left tackle depth chart right now. So I would take Ronnie Stanley at his age with his injury question marks over the left tackle plan for the Pats right now because they have nobody. And an actual left tackle, I hope Elliott Wolf learned it this way. An actual left tackle is better than no left tackle. It sounds crazy to say out loud. I know, guys. Yeah. It sounds crazy to say out loud, but the Patriots have to learn this at some point.
Yeah, I completely agree. And listen, I'm a Stanley guy, but I think George said that so eloquently of just get me a left tackle. Esmeezy, I've been known on this show to tell George, I don't care if you go to the local market basket and get a big guy that can move. Get me someone that can play the position. So I'm fine with Stanley. His resume going all the way back to Notre Dame has been solid, but I'll take Jackson too. I really don't care. I want to ask you this, though. We're talking about all these franchise tags and this free agent market that in some positions are kind of weak. Wide receiver comes to mind. Is this more of a case to trade back with that number 4 pick in this draft to acquire more picks because, Esmeezy, of the free agent market? And some of these guys like a Tee Higgins that we thought would be available, they're not going to be. Is it more onus now put on the draft maybe to trade back and acquire more picks in this draft to fill some of these holes in the roster. And maybe you won't be spending as much money as you thought this offseason, not because you don't have it to spend, but because the supply doesn't necessarily match the demand. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I mean, the obvious point of that, or the obvious counterpoint, is you need to find someone to trade back with, right? I mean, it's kind of, that's the top of the draft board, is kind of, it sounds like it's going to shake out that way. There's a few really high prospects: Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, a few of the quarterbacks are up there. But other than that, it's like, it feels like everything I read is kind of a middle ground when it comes to the other spots. So the Patriots might have trouble trading back at 4. But to answer your question, yeah, I mean, George just highlighted it, and very eloquently. Franchise wideouts are not found in free agency. It's just they don't get there. They're found in the draft, or they're found via these blockbuster trades. So with that said, I think if you don't target one in the draft at this point, the Patriots very well could be back here again next year saying, we have a better depth chart, we have a better number 2, we have a better number 3, but we don't have a number 1. And so, yeah, I think it's very fair to think that way.
There's always the possibility that you have the Saints, the Jets, as crazy as that sounds,
Yep.
the Raiders, quarterback needy teams, where you stay within that top 10, and you are in the range of a Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M, Jalen Walker out of Georgia, Tyler Warren. It's pass catchers. Yep. The Patriots need weapons. They need guys that can be reliable for Drake May, and it'll be a multi-year rebuild. Look at the Lions. That was the best offense we've ever seen. Not literally, some would say. They drafted their right tackle in Penei Sewell. They drafted Jahmyr Gibbs, the explosive running back. They complemented him in free agency with the David Montgomery. They drafted Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, and Sam Laporta. Took multiple years. It takes that for any team to do the rebuild. The Patriots have to. But they go after the top prospects. They're picking at the top of the draft picks. There's a reason they were in this. Or they traded up for like a Jahmyr Gibbs. There's just multiple avenues. The one thing the Patriots have is the flexibility on their side. But to have this massive need, and to me the need is bigger at left tackle than wide receiver, because they can go deep in the draft and build out a wide receiver room. Look at how the Packers have done it. Like, they can go with that. Let's get a bunch of wide receiver 2s, and then eventually they can find their way to getting a wide receiver 1. We'd all see left tackle is such a big need that a Will Campbell could be a placeholder. Could he be a good left tackle and a great left guard? And then while you're figuring out the left tackle spot, he's there. And then you bump him inside. If it wins, who cares how you get there? There's multiple avenues. It's just like a premier pass catcher, premier left tackles don't hit the open market. There's a reason for that. One way or another, the Patriots are going to have to give up draft compensation. They're going to have to give up valuable assets in some ways for them to solve their issues right now. Past draft issues have been bad. Who else you got on your list, though, Sean? What other guys that we could see getting franchise tagged do you have on your list?
Yeah, just to stick with wide receivers, and I know you mentioned earlier, but Darius Slayton. So, I mean, he is the Giants' top free agent, but I think it would be quite a surprise to see him command, what wide receivers are going for on the franchise tag. I saw there was a projection that he was going to receive like $16 million annually. The tag, obviously, much more than that. And so 28-year-old Slayton, caught 50 balls for like 770 yards 2 years ago. 4 of his first 6 years, he's caught 45 plus catches, 700 plus yards. So nothing like, he's not a Tee Higgins, and when it comes to resume, when it comes to production, but he would still elevate the Patriots receiver room. And it really just comes down to that. He would be that wide receiver 2 maybe, and kind of that mix sort of guy. So I think he's, I know that you guys have talked about him a little bit before. I think he's another player that really the Patriots could target. And I'll just kind of end with this one, and it brings us to a little bit of a different conversation, but another guy I mentioned, Sam Darnold. And you might think, why should the Patriots care about a quarterback? They have Drake May. Again, this is a completely different conversation, but essentially the conversation is, well, teams ahead of the Patriots in the draft care about Sam Darnold. They care about what's going to happen with Sam Darnold when it comes to their franchise tag. You're talking the Titans, you're talking the Browns, Giants, Raiders. I mean, who knows about the Rams with all the Stafford news recently? So, again, different conversation, but I think the Patriots would have their eye on a quarterback like that. Again, probably the quarterback who is set to hit free agency, the top one. And so they'll be paying attention to that now that the franchise tag deadline is open.
Hey, when I saw Sam Darnold on your list, I go, what? But it makes sense. Teams need quarterbacks. He could get $41 million if he gets franchise tagged. And if he turns that down, he'd kind of be crazy. But again, there are dumb teams out there that'll pay him a lot. I think that's where it's just such a catch, but it makes sense. And then what's most important for the Patriots, the domino effect that happens. Because the Saints team, I know they're in cap hell, but however they can navigate it. Maybe a Panthers team. He's been in Carolina before. The Jets wouldn't do it. He cannot work in New York. He can't work with that media. There's no way that goes back. But there are quarterback-needy teams in the top 10 and outside. Teams that need bridge quarterbacks or think they can do something with Sam Darnold. He won 14 games with the Vikings, Trav. He was in MVP conversations. He turned into Sam Darnold when the lights got brightest and the stage got biggest, and he made me buy you lunch, Trav. Literally, I had to buy lunch because of him, and I'll never do that again. Never bet on Sam Darnold again. But it's the most important thing that you point out, Sean, is that domino effect it has on the rest of the draft. Because if the Patriots are in a trade back spot and teams are desperate for quarterbacks. You mentioned Darius Slayton real quick. You mentioned the numbers he puts up. That was with Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Tyrod Taylor, Tommy DeVito. Yep. Why was he dealing with Daniel Jones? Because the Giants were desperate to have a franchise quarterback and paid him all that money. Other teams are going to do the same. Trav, you were going to go?
Yeah, and let Saquon walk. What idiots they were. Esmeezy, I don't give a damn about Sam Darnold's pockets. What I want to do is fleece every team. So let me get this straight, just so I'm following you. How would this look to benefit the Patriots? So we want Darnold to not be franchise tagged, hit the open market, and then play hardball, right? Because if he's playing hardball, he wants all the money in the world. Teams are like, we're not going to give Sam Darnold this. We got to figure it out in the draft, right? That's what we want. So now you get the teams wanting to get up to 4 to position themselves to get one of these mediocre quarterbacks from college. That's what we want, right? Am I following this?
Yeah.
You want him to get franchise tagged.
You took it a step even further.
You want him to get franchise.
What I was going to say, I was going to say that too. I was going to say you want him to get franchise tagged because it's then one less free agent quarterback. So then all the teams that need quarterbacks then need to target in the draft. You took it in a different way. I see where you're going with it. He plays hardball and all of a sudden it's, mid-April and he's not signed anywhere and all that sort of thing. That wouldn't be a bad thing either, I guess. Okay. But yeah, the way I was phrasing it, it has more to do with like the trickle-down effect that if he gets franchise tagged, then the teams who need quarterbacks have one less option.
Okay, there we go. I had to clear that up, George, because my way was way more sinister than Esmeezy's.
The Saints can't afford him. They have they're $54 million over the cap. But imagine if he wasn't tagged, he signed with the Saints. Yeah. That eliminates trade partners for the Patriots. The best thing for the Vikings is they get to an extension with Sam Darnold. What they might do, though, they might go the murky route. They might not tag him, let him go test the market, and then go, this is what we'll pay you. You're going to be a bridge QB, 3-year deal, 2 years are real. They figure out it. Maybe they just front load it. And then when J.J. McCarthy's really ready, he takes over. Yep. Maybe you have a team like the Colts that you have a desperate GM and a desperate head coach where they look at Anthony Richardson, they go, he is not it, but I got to save my job. And they can salvage a Sam Darnold dome team, good wide receiving room, not as good of a play caller, but there's different avenues. But you want as many quarterback-needy teams. The best thing for the Patriots is Sam Darnold staying in Minnesota. Look at that. Patriots fans rooting for Sam Darnold. What year is it? Hey, the Patriots, a big question mark. It's not just left tackle. It's not just wide receiver. It's also the running back room. Stick around. We'll talk about that in a second. But first, if you're enjoying Foxborough Rush, make sure to go wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music. Like, subscribe, download, rate, and review. Please download the show. It helps us out on our end. Figure out how many people are listening. You could also follow the show on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And if you're on Nesson's YouTube page, hit the subscribe button. Leave a thumbs up on our videos. leave comments, and we'll bring them into the show. That is Foxborough Rush, wherever you get your podcast and wherever you watch them as well. All right, so Trav, let's look at the running back room for the Patriots. Ramondre Stevenson, Antonio Gibson, they'll be 27. They'll both be last year of their deals. This is the position group we've talked about. I prioritize the least. My simple viewpoint is, it is what it is. You're not going to go out and spend. I think they use draft capital for sure, and you can find some steals later on in the draft. But this is a room I think they go in with it as it is and go, let's figure it out. Year one of a rebuild. What do you think happens with this running back room, though?
You know, we were in lockstep. Remember when we did that exercise, priority of the positions, and we both had running back towards the end. You had him last. I had him close to last. But it was also because our mentality was Tee Higgins was target number one for the offseason. And for right now, that doesn't look like it's going to happen. So, George, because of that, we get new data. Things change. I am moving running backs way up on my list. And I mentioned that at that time as well, that, look, if you strike out on Tee Higgins, running back is going to need to be a higher priority because, as I said at the top of the episode, there are ways to improve your offense, even in the passing game, outside of having a stud number one wide receiver. The best way to do it is to give your young quarterback a dynamic run game. That's a key word here. Right now, you have an average run game, maybe even below at times. I think a dynamic run game can really help Drake May. And you know where I'm going here. I've said this to you a long time ago. I don't love it at 4. You have to trade back. You mentioned getting a running back late in the draft. I think there's a great running back at the top of this draft. If you could stay within that top 10 on the back end of it, trade back to one of these teams that are going to want a quarterback. If you could get back to 8, 9, 10 range, I am completely fine. When I lay my head down on my pillow at night, if you told me the Patriots traded back later in the top 10 and drafted Ashton Genty, I would sleep like a baby because right there overnight, boom, your running game just became dynamic. And you know what? You brought up Jahmyr Gibbs to the Lions, and you said they supplemented that. They complemented him by bringing in a David Montgomery, and you're right. But it's Jahmyr Gibbs is really the straw that makes the drink work, right? I think you could reverse engineer that here in New England. I think you bring in an Ashton Genty. He's the Jahmyr Gibbs, but you already have your David Montgomery and Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson if you want to keep him. I'm kind of over it. I told you when they signed him, covering him in Washington like I did, he never really became what the folks in Washington thought he could. And now I see him in New England, and he actually, to be honest, looks like he regrets me. We'll see what, McDaniels can do with that. But I think if you can get an Ashton Genty here and you prioritize fixing that offensive line, Drake May, no one will be happier than Drake May. You have taken so much pressure off of him. And just go ask the Philadelphia Eagles what it feels like to go from an okay run game where your quarterback can run and you have decent backs to a dynamic run game where your quarterback can run and you have a dynamic game-changing running back. I believe Ashton Genty can be that in the NFL, just like he was in college.
Yeah. When Saquon Barkley was with the Giants, he was what if. When he got to Philadelphia, he became a winner. But that's a team that drafted Lane Johnson, drafted Jordan Mailata, drafted Cam Jurgens, drafted Landon Dickerson.
Sure.
And then signed Mekhi Becton. You got to build it in the front. And that is just getting way ahead of the horse if you go with an Ashton Genty right now with the build of this entire team. That is getting just wide-eyed and going, I'm going with the best available, I guess. First off, are you going to run a gap heavy or zone heavy? Probably go gap heavy. That's where Ramondre Stevenson likes more. You have 2 more seasons with them really on the books. And even you live with them 2025, 2026. You can maneuver the cap. Does he stop putting the football on the ground? If he does that, Mike Vrabel will roll with him. If he keeps it going, Mike Vrabel is the type of coach that'll say, I'm not the guy that benches you for a drive. You don't play, right? And I get the Antonio Gibson thing. It's with the multi-year rebuild and how the running back is set up that a Travion Henderson out of Ohio State, maybe a Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee, if they go more with like a zone run game, those are guys they can draft later. Could it be a Cam Scatterbo? They're going to add to that room right now. But I don't think it's going to be something as high as an Ashton Ginty or any running back for that matter in the top 2 rounds. Ramondre Stevenson, if he doesn't put the ball on the ground, Trav, he's great. He makes tacklers miss in space. That's what makes you a good running back in the NFL. The Ginty move, so much has to go right before that. Like the Lions, everything went right, and they knew how to sign free agent guards, tackles, what have you, to make sure it looks all good up front in front of a Jahmyr Gibbs. He's different. He's a difference maker. He's worth it. That investment's working for them. But so much was better in the front. We still don't know center. We still don't know left guard, and we don't know either tackle spot. I see the Ginty vision, but I got to sell you the offensive line vision first. I got to give you the foundation before you want to add a 3rd floor to the house. I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah. You could do both this offseason. Just saying. You could get the line and Ginty. You could do both.
When you got the most cap space in the NFL, that's like having an endless budget on renovating a house pretty much, right? If they draft Ashton Ginty, I am protesting. I'm going streaking in protest, and no one wants to see that. He's Travis Thomas and George Balekji. This is Foxborough Rush. Thank you so much for making us a part of your day. Catch new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We'll see you guys later this week.